Hey there, I'm Kyle Brotherson. You're watching Dirt Bike Channel, and today I'm doing the full review of this 2017 Sherco 300 SER. Stick around. So I know this is actually going to be a pretty long video. If you don't want to stick around because it's too long and so you don't want to watch it, let me just give you a couple key points on this bike. This bike is awesome. It is a ripper and it is a ton of fun to ride. It doesn't do anything wrong. It does a ton of things right. And there's only a couple of things to gripe on. And I'm going to nitpick on a few things. I'm going to praise a bunch of things and I'm going to nitpick a couple of things. There are no absolute deal breakers here. There's one thing that really bothers me about the bike, which we'll get into. But other than that, this is a freaking awesome package. And if you're kind of on the fence of whether or not you think you should go with Sherco, I mean, because you haven't seen a Sherco around or you don't know that many Shercos, guess what? There was a couple of Shercos on top of the Erzrberg rodeo in Austria this year. There was like a couple of Shercos in the top 10. That's all you need to know. There aren't Hondas and Yamahas and Kawasaki's on the top 10 of Erzrberg, but there was two of these guys on top of there. So that should tell you exactly everything you need to know. This is a legit bike. So let's get into some of the finer points on this thing. For those of you that don't know, Sherco is a French company and they've been importing them into the US now for a couple of years. I bought this bike directly from the US importer of Sherco into the US, that's Clay Stuckey, and he's been really fantastic to work with. I also rode the 300 SEF-R, the 4-stroke version of this bike, and it's interesting because the weights of the bikes, the 2-stroke and the 4-stroke, they were within like a pound of each other. It wasn't the lightest bike that I've ever weighed on my scale, but these bikes don't feel heavy because of the way that that weight is carried upon these bikes. And one of the things it really taught me is that there's a difference between weight on the scale and weight on the trail. Because these bikes, these Sherco bikes, the two that I've had, they weren't the lightest bikes that I've tested, but they are among the lightest feeling bikes that I've had. And this bike feels really planted and it feels really nimble. And so it's got kind of a great package. It's kind of interesting how they've made this thing and made it feel so natural to ride. One of the things that I noticed right off the bat is it had a roomy rider cockpit. This had a much more comfortable feel to me. For me, I'm 6 feet tall and I'm 170 pounds. I felt right at home on this bike, and I'm just within the weight range on most bikes that I don't need to change the springs in order to get the correct amount of rider sag. So I felt really comfortable with this bike. I was able to move the handlebars forward a little bit in the triple clamps, which is the cool thing. This allows you to do that. And I felt like I had plenty of room. It was easy for me to stand up on this bike. It was easy for me to sit down and corner on this bike. And so I just felt really at home. And I tell you what, if you've ridden a 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016 KTM, you're gonna feel, at least the 2-strokes, you're gonna feel really at home on this thing because it feels a lot like those bikes. It's a departure from the 2017 KTMs, but this bike does a lot of things right as far as the rider geometry and the setup with where the pegs are, the way the handlebars are. It just feels really nice. Let's talk about some of the things that I really liked on this bike. First off, I'm going to start with the motor. This is a 300 2-stroke and it runs just like a 300 2-stroke should. It's got an electronic power valve that I didn't have to touch. It just has the right amount of power delivery for the right situation, and I found it very easy to ride. It was one of those ones that isn't too punchy, but yet it isn't too docile. And so I think they've kind of found the right mix right off the bat for making this thing just a joy to ride and giving it enough power in all the different situations in order for you to get exactly what you need out of it. This bike also had a really interesting gearing. I love the gearing on this bike. It's got more of a cross-country style gearing. It's more cross-country than enduro, if you ask me, because it's got a little bit higher first and second gear. And that makes this bike a traction king. I've argued with some people about if the gearing should be higher or lower, but in my opinion, it's bang on stock because it's got enough power in that motor to be able to let that motor lug down. And with the way that it's geared, it will, you keep more speed because your first gear is a little bit higher. That was one of the detriments that I felt on the Beta. And so for me, this bike compared to the Beta 300RR, I was much more comfortable and liked the gearing a lot better. And I ended up getting better traction in slick conditions because of that gearing. So that was a big thumbs up for me. The bike has a great balanced feel, and I think a lot of that comes from this WP Explore 48 open cartridge fork. This fork is really good because it just is very predictable. I never had to worry about what was going to happen with the front tire. It always felt like it was planted, and I was able to find a happy spot in the compression and the rebound to the point that I felt like this thing handled really well. The combination of the linkage on the back and this thing was pretty stinking awesome. One of the things I really like about the bike on the linkage is that it's a little bit higher up in the frame. Let me show you that real quick. Notice how the linkage doesn't hang hardly any down below where the actual bottom of the frame is. A lot of the other bikes will hang down like another 1.5 inches, and it makes them more susceptible to hitting logs and hitting rocks and things. This one is actually a lot more of a smooth transition from the frame off to the linkage, and I think that was really good. And it also, I just felt like the bike was really planted, and I always knew exactly what I was gonna get in the rocks and in the roots, and it was actually quite good out in I didn't take it in a ton of whoops because most of the time I was doing mountain single track with this bike, but I do think that this bike would handle better than the 300 SEF-R did, the 4-stroke version of this bike, straight from the factory. So I actually really loved the things that they did with the suspension, and I felt really at home on it. Here's another nice thing Sherco did. They actually tucked the pipe up on this so it actually comes up a little bit higher, so it's not hanging down quite so far as the KTMs. Beta also did this, and I wish that KTM would figure out a way to keep those pipes up a little bit higher like they've done here on the Sherco, so kudos on that. Another thing is they gave you a skid plate straight from the factory. Now, it's not like a massive skid plate that has a ton of coverage, so it could be a little bit better, but at least they give you one straight from the factory. So I wish all manufacturers did that on bikes like this. Let's talk about the brakes for a second. The brake was just perfect. The rear brake, the front brake, everything. I was really at home on those Brembo brakes. Again, that's a really nice brake, and it had a really good feel to it. So this one I adjust a little bit to get right to my liking, and I had a nice happy spot with the brakes on this thing. Probably should have mentioned it while I was down there by the pipe, but I like the fact that they give you an FMF gnarly header pipe straight from the factory. That's pretty cool. This is also cool. They're giving you an FMF silencer back here, so I think they did those things right. That's pretty awesome. Right here, there's actually a grab handle to grab the bike, and it makes it so much easier to get leverage on this thing and pick the bike up and lift it over logs and lift it up on your dirt bike stand. And they've got it on both sides. There's a really nice handle on both sides of this thing where you can grab this. That's a huge plus, guys. The Beta also had that. The KTMs kind of suck for that. So this is much better and easier to grab and maneuver because of that. Here's another cool thing they did. I like the seat. It's kind of a grippy seat, and I like the fact that you've got a way to take this seat off without any tools. It's so annoying to me to have an 8mm T-handle to be able to take. On some of the bikes I'm riding, like the Yamahas and the KTMs, you have to take out 2 bolts to get your seat off, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be that difficult, so that's pretty cool. I like the seat. We talked about the brakes. Great brake, a great brake feel. And it also has a great hydraulic clutch. It's easy to pull, it's easy to manipulate, and I felt like I had really good feel with it. Especially on the brake, these brakes I feel really at home with, and I feel I can get just the right amount of braking power with one finger on that brake to be able to stop this thing, and it's not locking up the front wheel like some of the other bikes that I've tested recently. Believe it or not, the headlight is actually nice to have, and there's a lot of times when this has come in handy when you're coming back on a late afternoon ride and the sun is just going down. So I didn't find that it got in my way at all. It wasn't bouncing around and it didn't break, and so I really liked having the headlight. Let's talk a little bit about the rider ergos with this thing. I've already mentioned that I feel like I have quite a bit of space when I'm sitting on the bike, but the thing I wanted to talk about was how narrow it feels. And this is something that is not going to translate through the film, through the video. You're just going to have to take my word for it. This thing has a very, very narrow feel. When you're on this bike, it almost feels like, some of the time you feel like you forget that you have a dirt bike underneath you because it's so narrow, especially right where your knees are. When I stand up and I point my toes in, I can't believe sometimes that I've got a dirt bike between my legs. And I really like that because it allows you to be free on this thing. So when you sit down, you can feel it. You can feel the bike here with your knees up on the tank. And it feels really, really narrow. And then when you stand up, you get into that narrow portion of this bike and it almost disappears beneath you. And I think that's one of the reasons why I feel so at home on this thing is it's just got that narrow feel and that nice cockpit, and I've really enjoyed riding it because of that. It's got a really cool trip computer right up here where you can check how far you've gone. You can see your distances. You can see, you know, a couple different distances. It's got your odometer. It's got an hour meter in there, so you can track your maintenance on that. See what your average speed is. See what your top speed is for a ride. So that's really cool. I like the trip computer. I also like that we have a map switch for our motor. It's right over here. Sorry, it's right over here on your left thumb, so you can switch between fire breathing, dragon, and make it a little bit more docile. I like that. It's a little bit, it's not super easy to bump on the Beta. It was right here over here, and I had a harder time keeping it in one position on the Beta. On the Sherco, it's actually pretty good, and you're not bumping it a ton. So those are some of the main things that I like. All right, guys, so let's talk about a couple of things that absolutely have to be fixed. This is something that has to be fixed from Sherco. This is the master power switch for this bike. Listen to what happens when I hit this switch. I don't know how well you could hear that, but that's the electronic power valve powering up. It also powers up the headlight here. Now I can turn the headlight on and off with the switch over on the other side of the handlebars. But if this switch is left on, the master power switch, the battery of this bike goes dead. That's a problem because there's no backup Kickstarter. Now this bike has a really, really good alternator. It's got a great charging system, but it only works if you haven't run the battery dead first. This bike will start, it starts like a dream, but you have to have battery. And I have had this switch run my battery dead 3 times. It either gets left on accidentally, or you bump it in the trailer or something else, and I've actually had to put a brand new battery in this bike just now, today, because this power switch was left on and it absolutely ran the battery dead to the point that I could not get it to charge even overnight on a charger. So this battery switch, this master power switch, has to be fixed. These are the grips that come stock on the bike, and these are the same grips that came stock on the 300 SEF-R, the 4-stroke version of this bike that I tested earlier this year. On the 4-stroke, yeah, they're a little bit hard, but it didn't bother me. On this bike, I only rode it for about 3 hours, and I cut the dang things off. And the reason why is they're a little bit hard. They hardly provide any cushion for your hands. And this bike vibrates just enough that I was like, I'm not doing that. So the bike doesn't vibrate a ton, but it vibrates a lot more than the 2017 KTMs that are counterbalanced. And when you ride a KTM and then ride this one, you notice it right off the bat. Once you get going on the bike, you don't notice the vibration that much, and so it's not like a super downer. But these grips were kind of a downer for me, so I cut them off the bike and I put on some Pro Taper Tri-Density grips that I think are much better, and then I wasn't as bothered by the vibration coming through my hands after I swapped the grips. See something missing right about here? That's right, there's no Kickstart on this bike, and I think that's a huge miss. I don't know why every dirt bike manufacturer in the world seems to be dropping their Kickstarts right now. It's because they think that they don't need them. It's because they think that these bikes have good electric start, and they do. It's because they think the bikes are reliable, and they are, but here's the problem. I've been stranded on this bike. I was stranded. I shouldn't use the word stranded. I've had 3 times when this bike wouldn't start on me because of a dead battery, and since there's no backup Kickstarter, one of the times I was able to bump start it. The other time I was just here at the house and I was like, freaking dead battery, I'm taking the other bike. Luckily, I have another bike and I didn't have to bump start it. But it's like, they gotta, I think it's because they're trying to shave weight. Maybe it's because they're trying to make the frames narrow, and this frame is really narrow. But I'm sitting there going, I will take the 2 extra pounds or the 3 extra pounds to have a backup Kickstarter. Maybe I'm the only guy on the planet that has a problem with this, but I know Yamaha's been dropping it. KTM has been, like, KTM still has it on their 2-strokes, but essentially no one else has it on anything. I know Beta's dropping it on the 2018 models. And I'm just sitting there going, I don't know, man. I don't know why they're doing that. Another gripe that I have about this is it's got a lead acid battery. That battery weighs like 3.5 or 4 pounds. They could shave a bunch of weight off this bike if they just put a lithium iron or a lithium ion battery in this bike. It actually fits really down low. It actually fits below the air filter. And I don't love that because then stuff kind of drips down on the battery. It hasn't been a major issue to me, but I don't love the placement of the battery, although they have put it down low on the bike, which helps keep the center of gravity on the bike low. And I think that contributes to the way that this bike handles and the way that it feels. But I think they could have put a lighter battery in there. So give us a Kickstart, give us a little bit lighter battery. And I mean, those are the main gripes that I have on this thing. They have done a lot of things right on this, and they've just got a couple of things that I had to nitpick on. Let me do one more gripe. See this taillight assembly? This is a very hard, brittle piece of plastic that basically brings your taillight. And look, my taillight is broken. That's because I had a little bit of a wheelie over on a root log section, and because this is such a hard piece down here, it doesn't allow this fender to flex. And so on a lot of the other bikes, the fender can just kind of flex up and no problem. Well, this fender broke because this is so rigid, and it broke the taillight, it broke all this stuff, and it's kind of expensive to replace. And so I think this taillight assembly, if this hadn't been on, I wouldn't have broken anything. I wouldn't have had to replace my fender. The taillight assembly is pretty expensive. The fender isn't terrible, but it's also not the cheapest fender I've ever seen. And so this kind of, I don't love this. I don't love the taillight, and I don't love how brittle this is, because anytime you wheelie over or have any one of those little fun things happen, you're gonna bust all this stuff. That's not ideal. That's all the gripes I have, guys. This bike was actually easy to jet. It's got the key-in carburetor, the one that a lot of the KTM guys and the Yamaha guys are gonna be very familiar with. So I actually had all the jets that I needed to lean this thing out and make it run really well. And I just, in case you haven't noticed, I really like this bike. And if you are a guy that's like, I'm kind of on the fence because I've never heard of Sherco, you should just do it. This is a good bike. And if you're worried about being able to get parts for it, I haven't had any problem getting parts. I was able to go to shercooffroad.com and get any part that I needed. Clay sends those things out to you really, really quickly. You know, so getting parts has not been an issue for me. If you're worried about that, put that to the side, because it's a quality bike. You're not breaking a lot of stuff. It's not like stuff just goes out on this thing every other day, because it's really quality. It's a quality bike. It's put together really well. It's well engineered, and you can get those parts. So a little bit harder to find dealers for these things, but honestly, when's the last time you got parts from your dealer? The dealers that I go to never have any parts. I have to go through a parts house. So in this case, you're just going through, you know, like shercooffroad.com. So I really like this bike. I had a lot of fun reviewing it, and this, depending on when you're watching this thing, this is the bike that I'm giving away to a lucky viewer. So I think this review will come out right before the bike is given away on Labor Day in 2017. If you're watching that afterwards, sorry, you didn't get into the drawing. if you're seeing this 2 or 3 weeks after I put out the video, or a year after I put out the video, this is a bike that I gave away for the price of a t-shirt. So it was a huge risk for me, because I'm risking, you know, giving away like a $9,000 dirt bike. This is the factory edition, so it has a couple of extra kind of cool little things on this bike, but it's a joy to ride. I had a ton of fun doing it, and it's a solid bike. And if I had to pick between this or the Beta, and I got to be honest, and I don't want the Beta guys to come at me with pitchforks, I like this bike a lot better than the Beta. It fits me better. It feels more planted on the front end. It likes to go faster. It's got a little bit higher gearing in the first and second gear, which actually worked out in my favor. So all in all, if I'm choosing for just Kyle Brotherson, and I know I'm just one guy, but if I'm choosing between this one and the Beta, I take this one every day. Now, the Beta was an RR standard edition, so it wasn't exactly an apples to apples comparison because I didn't get the race edition, which I wanted. So I'll try to do that later. But this bike was a solid bike. I had no major problems with it other than that power switch, which hopefully, you know, Sherco can fix. So if you have comments, please leave them down below. If you like what I'm doing, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. If you need parts, please use my parts links on dirtbikechannel.com/parts. That helps to give me a little bit of a referral bonus, and all of that helps to continue to do these videos. I also want to personally thank all of my sponsors on Patreon, all the patrons that I have on Patreon who are helping the magic happen and going over there and donating as little as $1 a month. Thank you so much for doing that. And anyway, pretty sweet bike, and I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you subscribe and come back for more. Thanks for watching.